computer. Damn, Skippy. All right, we're going live on the book of the face melt. Don't forget to go to your pages and share this. Page manage. Veterans Action Council. All right. A moment. Preparing. I'm gonna have to put in a header. Taking forever. Okay. All right. V.A.C. This is number 12, right?
Yep.
Yes. Going live in 3, 2. Thank you, everybody. Welcome to Veterans Action Council Roundtable number 11. This one is going to be a special discussion. We are now streaming on Facebook, and I want to thank all of our members for being here tonight. We're going to be discussing the green paper. Well, what is the green paper? Well, it's a white paper. Well, what is a white paper? Well, a white paper is a basically information put to pen and paper and actually distributed for educational purposes. So we have actually come together around what we're doing, and basically we came together originally as a group of veterans, kind of doing a check-in on each other, kind of a COVID check-in. But basically in the military, we all had battle buddies, and or assigned one or had one. And so one of the things we always did was you always had to not only check on yourself, you had to check on your buddy. So we started off as a buddy check of a group, and we realized that together we were pretty powerful individually, and we decided to start combining forces into kind of a super friends. And from that, we decided to put some actions together. We were able to help some people out along the way, and one of the things we decided to do was put in an ask politically about what we wanted as veterans. So starting off as buddy check and now to a policy paper, how did that come about? I'm going to start off with Rico Pereira. What do you have to say, sir?
Gracias, senor. It's actually roundtable number 12, not 11. Number 11 was from Raiders to Researchers, which I highly encourage everybody to go back and watch, by the way. Really good episode. But this green paper, right, really started off from my end 7 years ago when Dr. Sisley got fired from her job at the University of Arizona. And I started a petition to try to get her job back, right, outlining some concerns that we had from the veteran community about the stifling of research and the need to provide answers to these questions that we had. And from there, over the years, it morphed into a couple different things from my end, right? It was an article that appeared somewhere. It morphed through the petition phases, trying to get Dr. Sisley her job back, to just outright putting our issues out there, what it is that is going on. And then when this group formed, it morphed again into a form letter that was essentially meant to summarize the concerns that we had after we had all come together to just touch base, see if what it is that we were experiencing in one place was the same as another, which was eerily similar, tragically similar across the country. And through the work that we were doing here with the council, somehow a white paper came up and everybody was like, what's a white paper, right? Like, I don't know what that is. I had never seen one. I had never been around one. And so Robert and I and several others, right? That's what we set out to do, was find out what it was, what was needed in it. And from there, just bringing it back to the group for edits and stuff like that, and sharing it with our elders within the movement to make sure that we weren't talking out of turn or really out of line. And we felt that it was important to bring the patient's voice back to the forefront. Somewhere in all this stuff, it had gotten lost, the patient's voice. And so reaching out to our elders, we received a document from 1993 that was basically going over everything that we were talking about here today. And so it was like, as soon as we got that, started going over and bringing it from a hard copy into the digital era. And then just like boom, 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 the work that Michael Crowitz had been doing, all the work that everybody had been doing for all these years is now just coming like this. And we were able to put this paper together pretty quickly, from what we understand, as far as like how long it takes to put these types of things together. And personally, I feel like it should be like mandatory reading for veterans and cannabis patients and stuff like that, so that you can begin to understand the history of this prohibition, the history of the medical cannabis movement, and some of the key players who have really sacrificed a lot, many of whom aren't here anymore, right? To get to the place that we are today. And so I'm sure I went off track, little bunny rabbit trails. I just took a dab right before I started talking. So yeah, that's what I got right now. Thanks.
Well, thank you for that, Rico. Needless to say, we'd never done a white paper before. On top of that, we'd never done one specifically on cannabis, so there was really no guidance. It was just one of those things that we took by the seat of the pants. Initially, thinking, a white paper is being, just a couple of pages long on average. Of course, they can be, much longer than that. And so we took advantage of that. And ours is approximately, well, it is 60 pages. So it's a interesting read, because it also starts at a very interesting point in history. And we'll carry on to that here as we get into the discussion. So when I look at members who are involved in writing and making this happen, I look at George and Tony, and why is this paper important to you?
I'll
Go ahead,
take
George.
I'll take the next one. So kind of starting like with Rico, my involvement with the V.A.C, like the first document that I got that was like, holy cow, was the 1993 document from the Randall. So that I had known about in 19 right after the Controlled Substance Act report was done and brought to Nixon. I don't know the specifics, but I know that there was, it found that there, of course, there was there was uses for cannabis medicinally. So having said that, I had always kind of looked all the way back to the 70s and Richard Nixon as it started prohibition, and kind of ignored that really every Congress since then has has ignored the problem, right? Um, Willfully ignored it, in my opinion. And especially once you start looking at the evidence that is presented to them back in 1993, the year I got out of the military. Um, how many lives would have been changed if they'd have read that paper and made political change? And how far forward would we be in the medicinal study of cannabis right now? Because that's what I've been screaming for all these years. Every year that we don't give the credit that it's medicinal and we aren't doing full out research on human with human studies, then we're not getting the full benefit from the plant. We know very little about it compared to what we will be able to know when they open up research. So I guess if you had to put it in one word why the green paper was important to me, it would be frustration. I and anger, if I wanted to add a second, is because the government that's really frustrating to me that once I found cannabis as medicine to really discover that essentially my entire life
Unfortunately, I think we're having some audio detail issues from George. George, you want to try that again? Still having some audio issues.
for a number of reasons um, to ignore that fact, and that's why the green paper became very important to me because to add the document that we added to this green paper from 1993 to that pile of evidence that they actually know it and are willfully ignoring it is really what makes it motivates me to get items like the green paper out there and to educate people, because I think the feelings that I have are justified. And if others would read it, like Rico said, if you made it required reading for cannabis patients and for veteran cannabis patients, especially, I think they'd have the same feelings.
All right, Tony, as well as to you, why is this paper important to you?
Uh, Thank you again, and it's always a pleasure to be here. I think the papers is important. First of all, I didn't even know what a white paper and green paper was. My experiences in Louisiana, it were anything to do with cannabis was always under the radar and trying to keep from being detected. And so I just didn't really have the educational background to know what a white paper was. But after looking at it and seeing all the compilation of information from so many different sources, it's like it's such a powerful document to me, that and the fact that we all came together just so organic and generic, just out the from our work in cannabis advocacy throughout the nation and throughout the world. uh, we just pulled all our knowledge together, all our background, and came together as a team, which is it's a lot different than if you're working for one particular industry, or a company that you have that to draw from. Everyone that works in that company can provide input to that green paper, but uh, in our situation, we came from so many different diverse backgrounds and areas of the country. We all had veterans in commonality, but we have so many different things to offer this paper, that I think that's what makes it so powerful. And the fact that we're right, or the green papers work is focused on medical part of cannabis, but there's an industry part that we're missing out on, that the industry came in and kind of took over and we're focusing on the prison reform part and after the green paper, we have some other work to do, but I think the green paper is going to establish our cred, our credentials. And once we get the medical, being the UN change the scheduling and recognize cannabis as a medicine, and if we, as we go on, I think this green paper is going to make that even more, establish that point even more. And then we can go in and negotiate for some of these things like farming rights and ways that we can get involved in the production flow of cannabis. So this is a start.
All righty, correct. Thank you very much, council member. We appreciate your thoughts and ideas. So next question is, why the green paper? It's a white paper. So Rico, why do we call it a green paper?
Really just being cheeky. And just as like a joke, and we're talking about cannabis. It's a green paper, kind of thing. Really, I didn't have any thoughts beyond that.
Couldn't get the unmute button there for a second. Well, that's exactly how it was. We just there's more than enough white papers, so we just wanted to distinguish ourselves because this one was cannabis specific. So there you go. So one of the things that we're aware of is there is a green paper, but what inspired the green paper? What made it go from an idea of a concept to where it is today? And it originally started as a kind of an ask. We were looking at doing things politically, and we wanted to we realized that if there was going to be a potential change in democracy, in the sense of having a democratic person into office, we should be prepared either way to give an ask for what veterans wanted. Since we had started as a actual a health check-in, a buddy check, and then we realized, well, we could actually do something together. So we decided, since we do lobby at a local, state, and federal level, what do we veterans want? Well, what do we not want? And so we started to originally come up with kind of a manifesto of what we wanted from the V.A.C. in sort of an ask. And I guess manifesto isn't really necessarily a good word to use, as much as it was a breakdown of what we would like to see. We were past the discussion of, oh, should there be actual, tests done on cannabis and veterans? We're way past that discussion. So what do we realistically want? What did we want to see? What do we expect of these politicians, and what should these politicians expect of us? And from that is really kind of where it felt. It started from our ask, and then we realized there was a fascinating piece of history that was actually put forward to the Clinton administration back in the early 90s. And being made aware of this, it was kind of as what Ricardo was speaking towards, is we felt a kind of a culmination point of information coming our way, that it kind of seemed kind of a natural symbiotic relationship starting to form in a concept of what do we do with this, because it was a historical discussion. And who would like to speak more toward that, which is speaking more about Robert Randall and Alice O'Leary? Go ahead, Rico.
So yeah, it was, again, like, given everybody's work, everybody's individual work, going back to how the council got together, we've all been bopping around, really engaged in the advocacy realm, activism, trying to change these laws, represent patients, fight on their behalf. And it really is a strong and connected network that we have. So when we started this work and we started these discussions, and everybody was bringing what they have to the table, putting it on the table, and we're essentially just going through all kinds of like documents, mass documents, all kinds of ideas, brainstorming, et cetera, right? And then one of the contacts that we have, fortunately, is Alice O'Leary Randall, who almost 30 years ago, along with her husband, wrote this document and provided it to the Clinton administration as a recommendation on how they should approach this medical cannabis issue. And this just happened to be about a year or so after the George W. Bush administration, or H.W. Bush, Papa Bush, canceled the compassionate investigational new drug program and didn't, from that point on, allow anybody else to apply for this program. That left a handful of patients who were getting cannabis from the University of Mississippi. And this was an attempt to try to plead the medical cannabis patient's case to this incoming administration, much like we as patients are trying to plead our case to the incoming Biden administration, that there has been an injustice done. There has been arbitrary action taken, and it has real human negative costs. And so they provided this document, and apparently, as we see 30 years later, nothing has happened on the federal level. Dr. Sisley just finally published her research after a decade of jumping through hurdles, obstacles, all kinds of impromptu legal cases and battles unexpectedly, and finally was able to finish that. But the obstruction has maintained from the 90s, from the 70s, from the 30s, right? Since Prohibition began and started to form. And what is required now, what we're hoping with this document, and it's one of the reasons why we felt compelled to include it in this green paper, and why it's 60 pages of dense material, to be honest, for sure, but useful material, very useful material as a guidepost, right? And when we looked at it, again, we immediately started to transcribe it from hard copy to digital, because at first we were like, well, we got to use this. We were not sure how we're going to use it. And then it just turned out to be, we're going to use the whole thing, essentially. And when we added our piece as the veteran community, and when Michael Krawitz, just a couple months after we started this, said, hey guys, some big news from the United Nations just going down. And then on December 2nd, 2020, they voted to recognize the medical utility. The United Nations did something that the United States has been unwilling to do, save for when they are forced to through legal action being taken against them by sick, dying, and disabled patients. And so when we saw our piece, when we saw the 1993 document, and when we saw the conclusion of this United Nations component, we just felt like this was a well-rounded document that needed to be read, right? To the person on the council. That's how we felt. That's how we feel. And so that's why it was included. That's why I feel it's important. And again, I think it's just unfortunate that we're in this situation 30 years after the fact. We have one patient left on the IND program, right? And I think that it's time for rational discussion and forward-thinking legislation to be implemented so that it can start to alleviate a lot of these issues that people are facing.
All right, our next question. why has the US government not done anything with the information it has had? It has actually been given this information that we start off with in the 1993. It was presented to the Clinton administration and they fumbled. Gonna go to Council Member George Armstrong.
Well, yeah, this is a difficult question because if you ask any politician, they're going to give you it's really complicated and it's not as simple as just recognizing it. And they'll bring up the treaty situation. But it is hugely frustrating because I don't know any person that could give you a rightful explanation for being willfully ignorant of a plant that could save and help this many people in our country. Their job is to take care of the people under them, and this is a plant that would have saved suffering. If you just look at 1993 to present, the amount of suffering and death that could have been saved, or the amount of suffering before people died. If you just looked at that, if you could pile that all up together, I don't know how anybody excuses that. So I would say most things are just excuses for me that come from the government. I don't think you're gonna, besides the actual treaty, which is, and there are other, they have other fallbacks, it's terrible for a kid's brain, and it's all, the same roadblocks that we've hit over the years. But in my opinion, that's part of the reason why the green paper is so important, is that people need to understand that the government knew about this in 1993. Then maybe they'll start to look back further and they'll understand that the government knew about it in 1997. Then they'll understand that the government actually probably knew about it in 1937 or 1970, I mean. And then in 1937, when the original prohibition of cannabis started, it has been a medicinal plant for thousands of years. And just because America and the rest of the world has tried to place it under prohibition in this little blip in history is not going to change the plant. So the government will eventually lose the fight. I just find it really unfortunate that patients, like Rico said, the disabled and the dying are the true victims of the prohibition of this plant. So when it comes to the government, that's what I have to say about I would call it, unfortunately, willful ignorance of true scientific facts in the face of suffering by their people.
Thank you, Council Member. We'll go over to Amy King. Why has the government not done anything with the information it has had?
It's for me, I think it's the lie that never dies. It's dilemma. The damage that they've put, mass incarceration. I mean, it's like George said, they knew and they knew and they knew. We know that, I mean, historically, if we were to actually give anyone to care in our legislature, in our Congress, I mean, we could show them things. We have the LaGuardia report. We have science that was being done in 1949, where, contrary to popular belief, THC was identified and was being used in studies on children, specifically children who had seizure disorders. And so then we saw this great blackout period we've seen a systemic covering up of this type of science. We've then seen, our presidents proclaim racist intentions towards certain segments of the population, varied segments of the population who utilize cannabis. So, I mean, I don't know what you would call that legally. I think, but it's a violation of someone's civil rights right there. So they just began this great big, and it might sound conspiratorial, but that's exactly what it was. They were covering up what was, clear and convincing evidence that cannabis shouldn't be withheld from the people. Simultaneously using our tax dollars to fund science in other countries. Now enter Raphael Mechoulam, while the rest of the world is, and he's got a wonderful little story about how he was able to acquire it, but from there began getting funded by our country. This, we can throw in the treaty. Our country, Israel, have actually been in violation of the treaty in its spirit and its intention, because they have science, the discovery of the endocannabinoid system, the subsequent information, even in vitro. It should have been shared with the World Health Organization. There was no reason for cannabis to be a Schedule 4, but it kept it there up until 2020. So, for at minimum 24 years, world governments didn't even share with the World Health Organization, maybe we should reconsider cannabis as a medicine because we found this large regulatory system. So, in summary, it's the lie that never dies. This whole thing, even as recent as the Senate report put out by Dianne Feinstein and John Cornyn, says the same tired. They're taking the cat. Remember the cat from earlier? The cat's like. So, anyways, darn, where was I? The Dianne Feinstein report says the exact same old tired rhetoric, right? Kids' brains. How much money have we spent studying the harms of cannabis, and we still don't know enough yet? So we need to shift the focus from 85% harm studies and 15% medical application. We need to even that up as well. So I think I'm proud of the paper. It lays out what are the systemic issues facing today and calls them out. It sets the record straight. There's no reason for anyone to still be in denial of what's stated in the paper. And I think it offers some solutions. So thanks for letting me be part of that.
Well, thank you for your input. It's very, very forth thinking. So appreciate you. All right, next question. What jumps out at you in the paper? Who wants to speak on this one? Anyone? Go ahead, George.
I definitely will. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't, having too big a mouth and taking up space for somebody else. What jumps out at me is the cannabis abuse that they are attaching to veterans. So if people don't know, part of the green paper is the situation that a veteran gets in where if they're honest with the VA and they tell them that they're using cannabis and they also have PTSD, it's almost like that immediately means you get this diagnosis of cannabis abuse disorder or some other things that they want to call it. But it is a travesty, and that part of it stands out to me because it's we know these people are at a time in their life where they're reaching out and trying to find help. And it just seems to me that then, because of course, bad things can come from these diagnoses that the VA attaches to these disabled veterans. So it's very disheartening to me to see them attach that to them, and then sometimes there was a point when they were taking away their medicines and doing all kinds of crazy stuff to them, to a patient who's at a really difficult time trying to deal with really heavy things. And the last thing they should have to be doing is fighting with their doctors about what I would consider basically a made-up diagnosis, because they don't have any scientific backing to even call it a diagnosis. If they're going to say they don't have the research that my medicine is medicine, then I'm going to call bullshit on that. Because if you can't say you don't have the research that medicine is medicine, then don't tell me you have the research that it destroys kids' brains, or that this vet that's using it to help him sleep has some kind of addictive disorder that we're now going to give him another pill for. That's what stands out to me in the green paper, because it's just one of those things where the government is whether they're willfully doing it or not, I can't we can't say for sure, but they are taking advantage of these people and pushing their thumb down on these people in the most difficult points of their life. And I find it incredibly disheartening.
Right on. We're gonna go. Thank you, council member. We're gonna go on to council member Aaron Plouffe.
Oh, thank you, guys.
What stands out for you in the paper?
Thank you. You know, what stands out after reading the paper and kind of consuming it and understanding what's happening is this is a really close to home issue for me personally. So, you know, I served as member, I've served in combat with members of this board or member of this group, and come here and I start to understand all the work that's been done. And, you know, years and years of people's lives have been devoted to this. And, you know, I'm really objective person, and I start to see what has happened here and try to figure it out. But what some of you guys don't know about me, and I may or may not have shared this, is that I worked in a treatment facility, drug and alcohol treatment facility for about a year or so before I worked in the cannabis industry. And I was the training manager. So as a training manager, you get to learn about all the things that your workers do. And I got to learn about cannabis use disorder. And cannabis use disorder, you know, hundreds of people were coming through with this cannabis use disorder. And meanwhile, I go home at night after work and I'm consuming cannabis, and it's part of my healing process. And so, you know, what stands out about the paper is just that the government has a perspective, and I don't think they're listening, or they really want to come off their spot. And, you know, I've been to all points, all the corners that this paper is referencing. You know, I've been to combat, I've trained people, I know people in this council, I've been out there advocating, I've written letters, and I've seen people say that it's a bad thing. I've seen people say it's a good thing, and I've used it personally, and it's benefited me. So I think it's worth it. And I think that it's time for the parties to recognize the medicinal plant medicine value, and, we'll just move on to the next issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Ricardo.
Just real quick, what jumps out at me is on page 23, we're in the 97th Congress, second session, HR 4498. They put forward to provide for the therapeutic use of marijuana in situations involving life-threatening or sense-threatening illnesses, and to provide adequate supplies of marijuana for such use. And when you look at the list of signatories and sponsors of that bill, Newt Gingrich is on there and others, right, who are still active on the political scene today. And then I look in books, a book like this, Marijuana RX, right, which was written by Bob Randall and Alice O'Leary Randall. And it goes into much more detail than the green paper does. But when you start to learn about the actions of people like Mr. Gingrich and others, and the kinds of meetings that are mentioned in this book, Marijuana RX, it's just listening to these people with their excuses on why they're not moving forward with this issue and providing access to people who need it. It's a little hard to stomach after reading stuff like that. Really hard to stomach. So that page 23, that jumps out at me.
Thank you, Ricardo. Appreciate your perspective always. So of course, how long did it take to write this? Well, that's kind of a philosophical question in a sort of
30 years.
Yeah, it took about 30 years or even longer than that, because if you realize what and when, who Robert Randall was, for those who are not familiar, Robert Randall was patient zero, also known as patient number one to all of us, because he was the one, and thankfully to Alice O'Leary as well, who actually put pen to paper to actually sue the government to win right to get access. Not only to get access, the government would then grow marijuana for these people at the University of Mississippi. To this day, they still do and provide 300 joints a month to now only one person. Only one. And that's the reality that's happened. So I think the V.A.C component of this, we spent about 7 months composing, in the sense of what our I guess 6 months or so composing originally, what the original concept of our 9-page contribution to that was a whittle down. It was much larger, much angrier originally as well. We kind of whittled the niceness back into it, because we wrote it with great passion. Because we're all passionate stakeholders. We're all patients. We've all had to risk our lives, our freedoms, to make criminals out of our friends, to get our medicine, to now, depending on where we are in the world, we have or may not have legal access. So, that's one of those realities we have to understand. And if you look at then the last component, which, Amy and Robert were contributors to, which was the United Nations, and especially Michael Crowitz, was quite considerable, amount of, forethought and ideas. You're talking literally generations sandwiched together in this one paper. And unfortunately, Rob Randall is no longer with us. I wish he were still around today. I think he would be proud of what we're doing. But at the same time, he would have never settled for what he had and would have pushed the issue further. And I want to give mad respect to him and Alice for their trailblazing when there was no trail in any way, shape, or form. They led the charge, and we're all forever thankful for what they have actually done. Needless to say, they're amazing people all around. So Anyone else want to speak on or toward the issue of how long it took to write this paper?
In practical terms, we started about 5 months ago.
There you go. And we combine it together, and now we have what we have. So, needless to say, it's been quite a journey, and we'll see where this takes us. Which leads us to the next questions: would have this paper had the same impact in the 90s, early 2000s, or even 2016? So I'm going to go over to Council Member Tony Landry.
Would it have the same impact in
The 90s,
Like-
early 2000s, or even 2016?
I just don't, I mean, the VA or the Department of Defense, they didn't even take care of veterans back 100 years ago. 1919 was American Legion formed, and we got the VA healthcare system. And, since then, they're not doing a very good job other than just filling us up with a bunch of pharmaceuticals. So the paper, the government, apparently, they're just not concerned. We have veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan with ailments that, cannabis could be a big tool to help heal them or help, at least their emotional scars or physical pain. And the knowledge has been there quite some time. The human rights of it is just, it's beyond. I just can't understand it, how they can get away with it much longer. It's criminally insane is what it is. It's nothing less than just criminally insane for them to treat us like that. And the paper is our, big push forward with information. It's like, yo, if you guys don't do anything about this now, after all these years and all this evidence coming forward on the efficacy of cannabis, it's getting to the point that we have to look at them as criminals. No other way to put it. So I don't know if the paper would have made a difference back then. I don't think so. I think it's going to be our efforts right now, just a big push and saying we're not going to accept it any longer. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Council Member. Ricardo?
So, couple different ways I would like to approach that question real quick is that, number one, clearly it wasn't effective on the federal level, so it really didn't have that much of an impact there, right? But if you look at the work that was done, because much like our movement now with the Veterans Action Council, we're not just about this paper. There's other things that we're doing. There's other avenues that we're approaching. This isn't our only poker in the fire, right? This is essentially a document meant to educate our community while we continue to push forward in the trenches. And so if you look at what was done shortly after that document, this is produced in 1993. In 1996, you have California's decision where, Arizona was, I just put out a blog about that on our website, veteransactioncouncil.com. Arizona was right there with California. And our politicians overruled the citizens of my state, right? And so then California went forward, trailblazing, and then we have the series of events, which if you read the document, are foretold by Mr. Randall and Alice O'Leary. If you ignore the situation, it's not going to go away, is what they're saying, to summarize. People are going to get more and more fed up. They're going to believe less and less of what you say, and they're going to take less and less seriously the laws that you're trying to enforce, which is really going to frustrate you and probably make you clamp down harder, which is what we see with the no-knock raids and the bullying treatment and just the really questionable and in times very unconstitutional behavior by law enforcement, politicians, business leaders, etc., community leaders who have looked on, right? But today, if we can equate, right, to where we are now and where they were then, with the resources we have available for us here, modern technology, updated network, laws across the land, United Nations decisions is coming in, a motivated body, a friendly administration. I think that if we were to look, we could expect a dramatic shift towards access for medical patients, a dramatic shift towards the ending of prohibition for medical cannabis access at the federal level, leading into an international market, interstate markets, and access at a scale that nobody could really envision, right? If we can scale it like they do currency, talking about inflation, when they say, you know, a dollar bill in 1913 was worth this, and today it's worth this. Same kind of thing in advocacy terms, I would say. So maybe not what we here in this current generation would expect as progress or the same impact, but definitely I feel if we were back there, looking forward to where we're at now, we would be mind blown at the potential. So we'll see.
Right on. Council member George Armstrong.
All right, so yeah, like Rico said, I kind of want to look at it two ways. The optimist in me definitely wants to say if this was put in the right people's hands in 1993, when we had these patients so eloquently sharing this information with our politicians, if it was disseminated and put in the right hands, that things would have worked a lot faster. I also know that in 1993, you know, the polling showed a pretty small amount of support for even medical cannabis. So I would say maybe in 2016, the way America had changed and the masses had started to be educated about the medical uses, and more people got to see their grandmother get positive effects from it instead of you know, thinking of Cheech and Chong or you know, some guy sitting on his couch smoking weed and eating Doritos. By 2016, and where we're at today, we're at, you know, in my state, in Pennsylvania, the
Anybody else lose George there? Yeah.
they aren't listening. I hate to go back to the frustration, but even with these numbers, so I'd like, the optimist in me would like to think that at either of those dates, it would have moved the needle. But we aren't really sure that it'll move the needle this time. We just felt compelled that this information should be out there, especially with the other things happening, like everybody else has said, kind of coming to a point last year.
Thank you, council member. Appreciate it. Next question. Why do we lag behind Canada? Because, you know, we as veterans, we're aware of their options, or if you are not aware, they have a program available in Canada for their veterans, and they can actually go get cannabis today, depending on their rating of their disability. So Needless to say, it's kind of a wish of ours as veterans. So why do we lag behind Canada? I will go to Council Member Aaron Plouffe.
Oh, thank you. So, you know, I don't know what else we lag behind Canada in, but it's really interesting because all of us, we've been around the world a million times over between the group. And um, you know, I try to do root cause analysis. So, you know, their soldiers have access to it, essentially part of their medical system. We don't. And you know why? And you know, Canada is about the same size as California, right? I bet you if California was its own country, we'd have it. But you know, the United States is 50 states, and it's a lot of, you know, a lot of America first things, and people want America to be together on ideas and not always together, and it creates division. But I think we just need to like open up a little bit. But we're lagging behind because I think that their people have identified the medical value of it. They know that there's a plant medicine, and their politicians go to the same meetings that our politicians go to. And, you know, they prohibited the plant the same way that our politicians did. So, you know, they're our neighbors. So I think that maybe they're a little bit more proactive in their veteran community, or maybe their politicians recognize the need a lot earlier than ours did. Thank you.
Yeah, I have to say it's pretty frustrating to actually, you know, sit here and, you know, talk to other veterans and hear of their access and access points that, you know, they can actually place an order by 8 a.m. in the morning and have it delivered by the postal service by 5 p.m. that evening, no matter where you are. I'm jealous. I'm not gonna lie. I can't deny that. You know, having that type of access. Plus, I also appreciate how the Canadians have actually tied the disability to a certain amount of grams. So, depending on your ingestion methodology, because this is something we kind of initially struggled with, was well, I use edibles and concentrates, which is basically pills and concentrates, whereas others I know can only do edibles, because they can't do any inhalation, and others can only do transdermal patches because they can't actually do anything into their lungs specifically. So by having their ability to mix and match depending on their disability rating for say 30 grams, then you can have access to, you know, a certain amount of this, that, and the other, as long as it adds up in the end to being within that, they get to walk away, you know, without any issue. And that's a standard. You know, they started their program in 2007, and it took a while to work. So one of the things we're working on, and we have been in contact with various military members who are in that system to educate us further, so that when we hit our lobby days, we can actually go in and specifically speak on and toward these issues, and come with you know, we know it's not going to be the exact same as Canada, but we should get to be there as close as possible, or want to be there, because also the big thing is, you know, depending on your ingestion methodology, such as if I use Dabrix, so they would actually reimburse you as a Canadian citizen for your actual medicinal usage. If they have the medical volcano, which is available internationally, then you would actually be able to write off your volcano, you know, as you know, your medical necessity. So that is again a standard that we should be able to have for our veterans, the access that they should have, because as we know, no matter where you are, no matter what state you're in, the price of cannabis is still way too high. And those that are on any rating of disability, especially even 100% disability rating, they live on a fixed income, which means the cost of the cannabis is way too high. I mean, and even, depending on discounts, etc., it's still way too high. They should be able to have a system of reimbursement currently within the state legal system, so that you can come to my dispensary as a veteran and with a voucher, so that I can actually give you in transfer for that denomination specifically in cannabis. Doesn't exist yet, but that's a potential starting point of where we can be. You know, sorry, didn't mean to be long-winded there. We'll go on to Council Member Dwayne Van Eitzen.
Yeah, can you hear me? Audio is good, awesome. So I wanted to just add to this that I feel the issue with why we lag behind touches on another issue, which was why and when it became illegal in the first place, and the recognition of false or ignorant studies done in the Nixon era. So it would be, and then the use of incarceration as a way to continue enslavement, on other levels, and limit progress of people. It would come to a full admission of all of that if they were to recognize it on that level. Canada doesn't have that as a stigma. They don't have the issue of the war on drugs. And in fact, Alaska never had that. Alaska's constitution always stated that an Alaskan could possess cannabis at home, small amount. So even that far north, Americans were getting it, but we aren't getting it where it matters. And it's proof that Alaska doesn't matter because there's not a VA facility up there. So.
Yeah, that is true. They lack the access of a VA hospital, and they have more capital of veterans than any other state, which is pretty amazing. We'll take this also over to Council Member Tony Landry.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, ATN. Well, we need to have home grow. Like in Louisiana right now, any amount of cannabis you grow in your home, if you get caught, one plant, it can be just a seedling sprouting. It's 5 to 30 years you're facing in jail. And like Wayne was saying, in Louisiana, we went from a plantation economy to a carceral state. We didn't stop slavery. We just changed over to prison. Angola, the biggest prison in Louisiana, was actually a slave plantation, and they just changed it over to a prison back in early 1800s. So I think the biggest thing, once we get with the recent, taking cannabis off of the most dangerous substance on a global level, that these nations, I'm reading Thailand just announced their Food and Drug Administration has got a draft to put cannabis in their national list of essential medicines. So that list, once you get on that list, it's this essential medicine, which cannabis qualifies to be on there now on a global level because it's been removed, it's been recognized as a medicine. So as these nations start, and the U.S. is coming, but this is what the Thailand Food and Drug Administration says, users can put oil extracts from cannabis in breakfast cereals, bakery products, beverages, snacks, or butter, as well as in food supplements. Mrs. Suprata, the administrator, told the media. So, I mean, it's coming. The U.S. has got to recognize it as a medicine, which they will. I'm not sure what the timetable is going to be, but it's coming. Once they do that, then the VA is going to have to recognize it and say, yeah, it's a medicine. Now we have to give it to them. So I think that's coming really right around the corner with this recent change, December 2nd, 2020, when they changed it over to medicine. I think all these other nations, including the US, the Food and Drug Administration, we need to listen on the national list of essential medicines so we can start. Insurance is going to have to start paying for it. A lot of things are going to happen.
Yeah, there has to be a paradigm shift. And, that's a reality that we're going to have to deal with. All right. So that leads to, now that we've released the green paper, what has the response been? Well, it just dropped kind of like last week. And on top of that, it's 60 pages. So it's a lot to digest. It's a lot of people to take in. But we have been also been blessed to be followed up pretty quickly by a couple of endorsements. Rico, do you want to speak toward this?
Yeah, and just real quick, I feel personally from my end that we lag behind Canada. I'll just say it because of racism and bigotry. Again, like we don't have the same kind of culture surrounding cannabis that Canada does, right? But without that, would we really have the jazz scene like we had it? Would we really have this other like really passionate art that was born out of that despair and that hurt and that misery and that persecution, right? It breeds beautiful stuff too, although it's not ideal. It's not something that is sought after. But also they, I hear, have kindness in their maple syrup. So something to be said for it, I think, I've heard. But the response has been really good to the green paper from my end, right? And the two rapid endorsements that we got from Patients at a Time and from Americans for Safe Access, I think speaks for itself. The reputation of those organizations is beyond anything that I feel I need to explain or whatever. It speaks for itself. It's quality, and they've been in the game for a minute, fighting for patients' access. So on the back end, because we did provide advanced copies to individuals who would need to be read up, or we felt would do well to be read up, so that when it is published, we can engage with them in conversation immediately, right? Such as certain representatives, select industry types, leaders in the advocacy world, et cetera, fellow veterans that we wanted to give a heads up. And it's been really good. So I'm looking forward, once people are able to digest this, like ATN said, what their response is going to be, what the feedback is going to be. We already know, as a council, we've already discussed that this isn't the end all be all as far as we're concerned. It's going to take shape. We're probably going to elaborate a little bit more on certain areas, add certain parts where new opportunities arise. And hopefully next year at this time, we'll be able to write a paper talking about what the new medical layout for medical cannabis looks like. Who knows?
Stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to write more stuff. Okay, because we're inspired. This is our first, this isn't our last. But at the same time, we were also blessed to have Alice O'Leary give us her permission, as well as she contributed some fresh work. So there's some fresh ink on this paper from her, and we give our thanks and appreciation. On top of that, also Council Member Michael Crowitz for his pen and ink at the end for what he has done internationally. It's basically the response that people ask, well, what should the response be? Well, the response is basically, this is a tool. We created a tool for you. We created a tool for you to take to your local council member, your national, your statewide. It's a tool, one that educates. And biggest problem that we feel is there's a lot of ignorance, but on top of that, there's a lot of willful ignorance around cannabis. And this is one of those you can drop on their laps so that they can actually digest and they will get it and understand. So this one is pretty straight up. We're not mincing words. We composed our thoughts and ideas, as well as we've compounded them with other generations of veterans, and we span all different generations of veterans that helped compose this. So I'm very proud of what has actually come out, and I'm very excited to see what other. If this was our first, I can't wait to see the other things that we produce, because I think we've got some good education, and on top of that, some great teachers. The greatest teachers of peace I've ever met are those veterans who have been and seen and lived through combat. And everybody who has served alongside of there, because as far as I'm concerned, uh, all who served are those who should have access on top of anything. And this document will hopefully help shape some specific policy in the near future, so that all of our brothers and sisters can get further benefit from this. And last but not least is a philosophical discussion, and one that can be and should be quite passionate. But this centers around the question, and it goes specifically looking. I'd like some answers to those who are considered 100% disabled vets who are here. I am not. I never got my designation because the VA kicked me out before I had access. So, is the government liable for injury if they keep a disabled veteran from an effective medical treatment? In the sense that probably beforehand, the DEA could have used the excuse, well, there's an international treaty specifically around this. There's no medicinal value, hands off. Well, December 2nd, 2020, that changed forever. And we are still awaiting word from the Drug Enforcement Agency regarding this new classification, because this was the quote unquote glass ceiling that the DEA was firmly bound behind, and there was nothing they could speak, act, or discuss towards. Well, now the DEA, they're the ones who are in charge of currently, overseeing drugs, and cannabis currently falls under this. Will there be a jockeying by the alcohol and tobacco and the ATF to actually pick up that mantle hold, since they actually hold the recipes for alcohol? So it'll be very interesting to see what actually happens. But it still leads us back to the question: is the government liable for injury if they keep a disabled veteran from an effective medical treatment, now especially post December 2nd, 2020? We'll start this off with Ricardo Prieta.
I feel like I'm talking a lot. But yeah, I am 100% permanent and total, rated by the VA, honorably discharged by the military, medically retired at 70% from the Army. And I receive and eligible for 100% of my care through the VA system. All my appointments, all my therapist meetings, all my primary care physician meetings, all my medications that I get and I'm prescribed. When I was getting scripts and all that stuff, if they didn't have them at the VA pharmacy, all I had to do was take my script to the Walgreens or the other pharmacy that was down the street and get it that way, or they would just mail it to my home. So whether or not they're liable, I think that speaks for itself. With, if you go by the definition of the care that's supposed to be afforded to disabled veterans, specifically veterans that are rated 100%, it speaks for itself. But if you want to, again, get philosophical about it, they're in a position where the evidence that's been accumulated is irrefutable. And if they were to make some moves rather quickly, to head this off and provide access based off the precedent that's been established through court victories won by patients, through precedent set through state law and other medical programs across the country, and also through scientific research and data that's coming back. At every point, their arguments are getting defeated, and it becomes more and more a question of, are they doing it on purpose? Right? And that's a rather kind of like tongue-in-cheek question, because, you know, if you're doing something for this long, is there any other explanation for the behavior other than it's intentional and meant to keep a certain either gold mine nugget that you found for yourself, right? And that could explain the patents, that could explain all the GW pharmaceutical activities and why they're growing all these plants in different locations and stuff like that, trying to corner the market on their end so that they can benefit financially when it just becomes too much for them to defend, when they finally lost, right? If they, the powers that be, are thinking about all these things, I think that it would be in their best interest to ask themselves that question that we just asked us, right? And then to take appropriate action, because it's not going to go away. It's a reality that we're dealing with. And it becomes, unfortunately, a philosophical debate at that level where they have that luxury to sit down and have these discussions in their nice leather chairs, comfortable environments, far removed from, again, the reality that we face on a day-to-day basis. So that's for a lawyer to really decide. I think that if anybody is on here who is a lawyer or has those kinds of levers that they can pull, maybe that's a really good question for a law class. Maybe that's a really good question to chop up over a semester. If I was an instructor, you know?
Thank you, council member. Council member Aaron Plouffe.
Yeah, so, you know, is the government liable? They have mandates, and, you know, through my learning and listening at this group, especially listening to Michael Crouch, Michael K talk about all the different treaties that the United States is in, and they're not necessarily treating properly or carrying out all the mandates. So, you know, the federal government exists to do a couple things. They send us out there and, you know, like, I guess the case probably could be made. But, you know, what I want to take out is that if, when we get through all this together, if we can still have an effective medical treatment, like, I want the government to work towards that. They might be liable, but you know, we really want to be solutions oriented. And, you know, I think that you know, the paper that we submitted is that solution. So you know, looking back, we might need to have someone be liable. You know, we don't get unindoctrinated from our service. And, you know, the part of the handshake that they wanted from us was keep all of our people accountable. And now we're at the other end of this accountability chain, and we're getting a different result. So, like, we got to kind of reconcile that. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate you. Going over to Councilmember George Armstrong.
So I guess, like Rico said, I guess whether they're liable or not, I mean, uh, that will be debated. That would be debatable in court. I guess my thing would be that this is really a place to start with people that are important in making decisions, right? If you sit them down, you can get them to read the green paper, and most importantly, the paper that was given to the Clinton administration in 1993. Get them to understand that. Then you sit down and you review with them what happened on December 22nd, 2020, and how that has changed things, in that that we have the universal acceptance of the medicinal property of cannabis, so to speak. And then you pose them with this question. You pose the powers that be. If you have a 100% disabled veteran and you have a government that has known since 1993, now in 93, like Amy said earlier, they can go back to their, the treaty said there's no medicinal uses and all that. But if they'd have listened to that paper in 93, we'd have never made it. We'd have never made it this, it never taken us this long to get this far. So I think it's a really important thing to sit down and present this to somebody, not in the legal form. I'm talking about in the moral form. I'm talking about my brothers Aaron and Rico, who went and sacrificed way more than most Americans are willing to do for this country, right? I think it's important to sit those people down and ask them this question after you've reviewed the parts of the green paper that we've talked about all along, because this, to me, is the reason that it all exists. Because if all these green paper, if all the things in the green paper come together, what you see is that they knew that it had these qualities, and for whatever reason they haven't done it. Now the question becomes, you also knew during that time that you had agreed to 100% take care of these disabled veterans. So you are liable, whether the court says you are or not. The government is liable for not taking care of those veterans as well as they could, because this information was out there. So that's what I got on that.
Thank you very much, Council Member. And needless to say, yeah, I do believe they are liable, especially in the post 2020 December 2nd. But we'll see what happens with that. It's again more of a philosophical discussion, because I agree with you 100%, George, that those that gave the most gave all, and if they're disabled, they should be taken care of, and they should have and reap the benefits, exactly what the Canadian veterans experience, hands down. I know that's something they should be able to have access to and toward, and that's something that will work and will help and assist, and maybe in the end we can arrive there. But that's why we created this paper, so that we could start the discussion, so that we could arrive somewhere, because we realize that we're more powerful together, and many hands make for light work. And I can't thank enough of all of you for putting this together. So if you're not aware, go to our website, veteransactioncouncil.com. You can see the green paper is there. And please read it. It's 60 pages. I know it's a lot of reading, but I guarantee you, once you get through it, you'll come away with some new frustrations and understanding about why we're so passionate about why we do what we do. And we're going to take it, we're going to move it forward. All right. So I want to thank our council members, Ricardo Prieta, Dwayne Van Eitzen, Aaron Plouffe, also Tony Landry, George Armstrong, Amy Case King, I'm Etienne Fontan. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank our council members for their countless hours of volunteering, because we created this out of love. We don't get paid for this. We're all volunteers. We give a care, and we want to see you take what we have and utilize it as an educational tool. We made it for you, not for ourselves. Well, don't get me wrong. We're going to use it for our own use as well, but we made it for you. So educate yourselves. I want to thank our council members. This is Veterans Action Council Roundtable number 12. And I got that right. And we will be airing this on our YouTube channel as well. We have a YouTube channel, Veterans Action Council. This will be premiering, this same video will premiere tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I want to thank all of our veterans for being here. We will be back in 2 weeks. We do this every other week. And we appreciate y'all for joining us on Facebook. Please like and share on our YouTube, and also like it and share it on Facebook. This stays around on Facebook, and it's a great tool to spread around. So I appreciate you all for being here. I wish you all the best, and have a great rest of your day.
See you later, guys.